All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the lineup. My name is Lily D. Tay. I'm on the publicity team at Soho Press, and we have got another really wonderful event for you this year. So thank you for tuning in. If you've been here before, if this is your first lineup event, we're very glad that you joined us. This is a somewhat new series where we put Soho crime authors in conversation with one another. And it's sponsored and funded and helped out by our friends at Mystery to Me bookstore in Madison, Wisconsin. So if you really love what you've seen here and you love the authors, which we think that you will, we have a little green button down at the bottom where you can buy their latest books. And the authors have signed book plates for you this time around. So you will be getting signed books as well when you purchase a book. A few more housekeeping things before we begin. We are having like some special door prizes tonight. So at the end of the event, we will announce 3 winners who will receive Mystery to Me gift cards. So you can go and spread the love again to your bookstore. And then also we'll have a little section for Q&A at the very end of this. So if you've got an author or a question for one of these authors, you can put it in the little chat box. It says Q&A on the right side of your screen, and we'll be fielding those as many as we get time for. So the authors that are joining us this evening, I'll introduce really quickly. We've got John Shen, who is tuning in from Japan. Thank you, John, for being up so early with us this morning. John Shen is half Chinese, half Scottish-American media executive, producer, and entrepreneur who was born in Knoxville, grew up in San Diego, and is now based in Los Angeles with a penchant for very long run-on sentences. He has served as president of Wildstorm Productions, senior vice president of DC Comics, publisher of Marvel Comics, CEO of Cryptozoic Entertainment, and co-founder of CCG Labs. You can read more about him at www.johnme.com. And S.J. Rozan is the best-selling author of 20 novels and over 80 short stories and editor of 3 anthologies. Her multiple awards include the Edgar, Seamus, Anthony, Nero, McCavity, Japanese Maltese Falcon, and the Private Eye Writers of America Lifetime Achievement Award. She's served on the national boards of Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime, and as president of Private Eye Writers of America. She was born in the Bronx and lives in Manhattan. S.J. and John's new book, The Murder of Mr. Ma, is a swashbuckling series opener that follows 2 unlikely allies as they race through the cobbled streets of 1920s London in search of a killer targeting Chinese immigrants. Welcome both. Thank you for joining us. And Gary Phillips has published novels, comics, novellas, short stories, and edited or co-edited several anthologies, including the Anthony-winning The Obama Inheritance, 15 Stories of Conspiracy Noir. Almost 30 years after its publication, his debut, Violent Spring, was named one of the essential crime novels of Los Angeles. He was also a writer and producer on Snowfall, a show streaming on Hulu about crack in the CIA in the 1980s South Central, where he grew up. In a follow-up to One Shot Harry, Ash Dark as Night, Phillips' newest novel, fearless crime photographer and occasional private eye Harry Ingram finds himself in the LAPD's crosshairs after capturing damning evidence of police brutality. Thank you for joining us, Gary.
Hi, Gary.
So today we are talking about historical mysteries, and we have 2 very different books here that we're chatting about today. Gary, your book is set in 1960s Los Angeles, and John and S.J., yours is set in 1920s London. Each novel took likely a lot of time researching and planning. So what does the research process look like for both of you, especially John and SJ being a duo? And what made you commit to the time period that you decided to set your novels in? Gary, do you want to kick it off?
Oh, me? Yeah, my research process is I do some research initially. Invariably, I have several sort of go-to books on you can't really see it. I'm not going to turn this around because you see all the clutter here, but there's a kind of shelf in here where I keep my LA books. And being an old man, my dad was he wasn't even he was a grown man. He was in his 20s during the Depression, and when he eventually made his way west. Anyway, so as a kid growing up, I heard all those stories about Central Avenue and LA back then and all this. So all that's always been in my head, and invariably that stuff has leaked into various other novels, usually as a backstory. But so for the Harry books, in particular, the ones I kind of focused on who Harry was, and realizing I was going to set those books in the 60s. Partly I was going to set the books in the 60s because one of the inspirations for Harry, the real life Harry Adams, was a photographer here, a freelance photographer, part-time barber here in LA at that time period. But he wasn't really a crime photographer. Although, when Malcolm X or black celebrities came to town, he would take their pictures for the black press. Anyway, once I knew that I was going to be in the 60s, I did a bit of a deeper dive into very specifically about locales then and situations, events that had happened, knowing that those were going to be kind of the backdrop, the weaving in of the story that I want to tell you about this guy. And like I said, so the only reason the 60s popped in, I had written about the 60s before, but never extensively. So this is the first time I've truly taken that kind of walk. And then I guess just to finish off real quick, we were talking a little bit about Anita Claire before we came on. And Anita Claire, who's Harry's significant other, but certainly a person in her own right. She's what was then called, or would later be called, a red diaper baby. She's the daughter. She's a mixed race woman. She's the daughter of these Reds, these members who had been members of the Communist Party USA and who they affiliated with and what have you. And so she came through that time of the Red Scare, particularly here in LA. And I knew folks who had gone through that. I was once on the board of this library, this depository of sort of red and left and labor books and what have you. I got to meet those kind of people. I got to meet a couple of people who were fought in the Spanish Civil War with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. All that rich kind of history I could draw on, or people that I knew, and little anecdotes that I knew about that I could draw on, and I could put that in the Harry book.
John, you want to take the beginning of this, and I'll take the end?
Yeah, totally. I guess for me, I really look at how the relationship between I'm sorry, there's background noise now in the lobby. I'm going to try and move to a quieter spot, but I really felt like there was need to tell the story of the relationship between China and the West, which has been very evolutionary. And looking at the 1920s, that was a very pivotal period for the world, actually. And there's this book by Bertrand Russell called The Problem of China, which it's very short and it very, very clearly lays out how we got here. And I think, and SJ doesn't love when I say that. It's like I want to put into the introduction, it's like, put this book down and go read The Problem of China. Because if you do, you'll understand why everything is the way it is right now. And it came out in 1924. And China was on the precipice of being invaded by Japan. That's it. That's the and from there, that's where we got the raw land for the book, and then just started grading it and saying, oh well, looks like we can build a house here. I was like, well, no, we can build a building here. It's like, no, we can build a city here with this period of time. So, and that's and like Gary, I have a shelf with hundreds of books.
And now some of those books are behind me here. When John came to me with this idea, I thought, great, but I know nothing about the 20s. I had not written historicals. And so John started sending me books, and I started delving into what London was like in the 20s, and the Chinese history that John was. I had a very basic background in Chinese history, but John was sending me all kinds of books, the Chinese Labor Corps, which is important in this book, and so on. And I started looking at old maps and old Sears catalogs to see what people were wearing, stuff like that. And that was the kind of research that I did. Also, I read a couple of books by Lao She, who is our narrator and was in London at the time. And his books have been translated. And of course, the translations I read were done in the 60s. So they, I don't know how they relate to the attitudes that he was writing with, but they're very funny in any case. And so that was the kind of research I did to establish those characters. And then,
Oh, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and another thing that we have not touched on much is that The Murder of Mr. Ma is a retelling of Lao She's most famous book in the West, which is called Mr. Ma and Son, about a Chinese merchant in London and the racism that he faced. And so we took the characters from that and then set them in this cozy mystery. Are we cozy? I feel cozy.
Well, you look cozy. I just got back from Malice Domestic, which is a cozy convention, so we must be cozy because people there liked it. But yeah, we when John said to me when we started that we're going to tell the entire history of modern China from the 20s to probably the 80s or maybe even now with through books with mysteries and kung fu. And I said, "Oh, sure. Why? Who wouldn't?" So that's the answer to that question.
And our first story arc, I mean, there's no spoilers here. The first story arc starts from 1924 and goes through this thing called the Xi'an incident, which is, it's on Wikipedia. Everyone could go and see. This is how the story ends. Okay.
Right, but that's not the arc of this book. That's the
No, I know, but hopefully I'm so hopeful that we will get another book, so but we're really going to tell the story of how China ended up being split into this horrific civil war and how Japan utilized that to its advantages to invade.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I do want to go back, SJ, to something you said about the Chinese Labor Corps. And we will talk about the Kung Fu, of course. We can't talk about this book without speaking about the Kung Fu. But besides the action, there is the Chinese Labor Corps sort of provides this background for the murder of Mr. Ma. So can you speak to why you wanted it to have such a presence in the murder of Mr. Ma?
John, you
well, because nobody knew about it. I didn't know about it. I ended up finding out about it from a Donnie Yen movie called Legend of the Fist, where they showed about 300,000 laborers were sent from Shandong to the front in World War I, and most of them did not come back. And it's just this completely, they were not soldiers. They were there, and their job was to run supplies up to the trenches and bring injured and dead back. And it was very dangerous. As I said, most of them died. And there's a whole, you could do like a massive, beautiful story about these men and their travails, and then how, a lot of them met French women and, settled in France, some settled in the UK. It was just a fantastic, untapped piece of history. And, an interesting tidbit is that there are people who blame the Chinese Labor Corps for bringing the Spanish flu to the West. So you can see that even 100 years ago, that sort of racism existed. Because they came from China, they went to Vancouver, they trained, then they went to Newfoundland, and then went to England, and then went to France, and their reward for that was, we think you guys are dirty, infected Chinese people, which is really a sad state of affairs.
I also want to add a footnote to that. There were laborers from they worked for the British in France at the front. There were laborers from all the British and French colonies, not nearly in those numbers, but from the French colonies in Africa and from the British in other parts of Asia. There were people of not French and English lineage at the front in a whole mixed race group, and this is a story that is not told. And so when John suggested that we tell it, I thought that would be great. That would be a great and if people want to know more, there are books. We didn't want to clog up the story with history, but we wanted to put the history in there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, always when we talk with authors, I personally am just very amazed at how much research does go into a historical mystery like the two books that we're talking about today, and also how much research I'm sure you would love to include, but it just doesn't fit with the narrative, or you don't have the space. So I'd love to know something. John's already gearing up. I'd love to know something.
Gary, you take this first.
Yeah.
That was part of your research that you maybe couldn't include in your novel that you would have loved to.
In One Shot, and then now in Ash, and I should say Ash The Darkest Night, starts smack dab right in the middle of the Watts riots in '65, and which is again a kind of this pivotal incident certainly in the history of Los Angeles, because now, the first book we're firmly set in '63. Housing covenants have been, in fact, been upheld by the California Supreme Court. Chief Parker, the chief of the LAPD, is actively recruiting white officers from the Jim Crow South to come and keep the natives down here in Los Angeles. And so now 65, that hasn't stopped, right? Parker's still the chief of police. Housing covenants, although there was one thing passed by the vote. Anyways, housing covenants are somewhat starting to come off, but are still kind of in place. And there's a whole desegregation campaign out in a place called Hawthorne and this and that. Anyway, all that's there, right? And like you said, you can't put everything in, because this isn't a travel log. This is a mystery. This isn't entertainment. This is, but we're grounding them, right, in a kind of parts of reality that did in fact exist. And by the way, the reality that, of course, supplies the grounding, the verisimilitude to the characters we're putting on the page. So it does matter that Anita's parents are lefties, and we're also up to something else, and she's helping them. But I won't give that away. But people kind of know what's going on from the first book, although Harry doesn't know. And that Harry is a product of this Los Angeles in a certain time period. But he is also a Korean War vet. And that's also kind of interesting point, which is, it's kind of as they often said, the forgotten war. It's also the first time that the United States Armed Forces are integrated. But Harry has come through this, and there's a friend of his who was blinded because a mine went off. And there's a harrowing incident that haunts Harry from the war. But these are men of a certain time period. And so when he and Arthur talk about the war, they tend to be a bit vague, because they're not guys who would go see a therapist. right? Head shrinker. They know, but they also understand they don't quite give it a voice, but they also understand that in those days it was called shell shock or combat fatigue. But they understand that there's something they've carried with them from that time period till now. That there was this that in a certain way maybe the enemy was clear, even that wasn't quite clear. And then in the end, the so-called Korean War became a stalemate, right? Back to the 38th parallel, and that there's a kind of other ground war or grind that they're in now in Los Angeles in this time period in the 60s, in the mid 60s. So on one hand, there's the civil rights movement that everybody is watching on TV every day. And then Watts happens. And then you see also on TV, fire hoses being let loose on the populace, snarling German shepherds at the end of a leash, and people getting their heads beat in with batons. So there's this shift. There's this understanding that there is a change, but that the change is going to be very hard won. And so all that to say is that yes, so there's all this kinds of, something John said earlier, there are all these sort of hidden histories to any place and people and time period. Fascinating incidents, fascinating people, things that have occurred that haven't made the headlines and yet moved events forward. So I think, I'm always keen on finding that stuff out, and even if it's just a little hint of it, even if it's just a little kernel, couple of little what do you call it, breadcrumbs that I lay in the book about it, because in this book, Ash, it particularly starts to look at the intelligence apparatus that in fact Parker helped to construct, which he called it his G2, and then this will be refined in the 70s when I became an activist. This gets refined under Daryl Gates, which becomes in the Public Disorder Intelligence Division. But you can trace its roots from the Red Squad in the 50s, and then there was a side thing about the Hat Squad, which kept the gangsters out of town.
There's so much.
How this becomes this intelligence division.
There's so much depth in One Shot Harry, where Gary will talk, because he writes very visual prose, and so he's just describing Harry walking down the street past some building, and then there's 10 words about the building and the architect and something about that, and it's just I want to go, let's go see that building together, Gary, because no, because it adds that it's flavor, and so or spice, yeah.
I want to say two things. One is we are still in 1924, so there's nothing that we left out that we can't put in. So, but also I just want to say I am a red diaper baby. I just want to say that. I just want to make that point. I am of the last kind of generation of red diaper babies.
I'd say the research that SJ hates most is the parts that I find out after the manuscripts are done.
John will occasionally text me and say, can we have a short call? I have an idea. No, don't have an idea.
No.
This last idea, this Cartwright idea, that we won't go into right now, this is a great idea. You have to learn about John is that although sometimes the ideas come late,
I don't even know what you're talking about. Great.
Good. Well, it was a great idea, and I'm running with it. So there you go.
Righteous.
There's a big difference between how detective fiction is depicted in China, and it's hundreds of years old. There have been Judge Dee stories for the past 1,300 years, and there's, it's sort of like watching an episode of Law and Order where it's, the crime, the investigation, and then the prosecution. And there were things that, and it wasn't wrong to take this out, but I had put a lot of things in there that created more of a traditional flavor that it just won't work here, so, and that's just like, you can't kill the dog, okay? Like,
Absolutely.
don't kill. Although, they did kill the dog in the Hound of Baskerville, so.
There you go. Yeah,
They killed the two dogs, the little one and the big one, but
but
we can't kill the dog. Lily, you had something else?
On behalf of the very sensitive population out there, I'm so glad you didn't kill the dog.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's our version of fridging,
Yeah.
Do you guys know what fridging is? It's the dead girlfriend in the fridge trope.
Ah.
So.
Yeah, we're not either.
Good
Yeah,
to see
People so it was easier.
I did make an Alex Cross video game that literally fridged somebody, and there's like, okay. Anyway.
Well, he deserved it. Go ahead, Lily.
I did not. Oh, I was going to say I did not know there was a verb for it. Good to know. Now we all know that. I wanted to go back a little bit and talk again about Ash and One Shot because we've been talking about a lot of the very deep and important history that sort of provides the background for your novels, Gary. But something that you also do really well is inject humor into your novels. And so I just kind of want to pick your brain about that and, why somebody, specifically like a noir author, would choose to have levity in these very difficult scenarios.
Well, I think, Lily, you can't. You have to. You have to take all this stuff with a kind of a, this big grain or grains of salt. You gotta, because so you could. I suppose you could be so harrowing that it's so bleak and unrelenting or whatever. But certainly, I certainly envision Harry and Anita as people who have maybe it's a certain sense of the absurd. Maybe that's what it really is, right? That kind of like in the Chester Himes novels, where he wrote about a Harlem that he never really. I mean, he'd been to Harlem a couple of different times, but he was writing about a Harlem that he just sort of created out of whole cloth. But it was a kind of a surreal Harlem, right? In these crazy plots, $180,000 hidden in a bale of cotton, moving around Harlem. Somehow we can't find it, whatever, right? But it was really about his two detectives, right? Who, by the way, this is not quite off the subject. Who, by the way, were apparently based on. I know in particular, one of them is based on an actual LAPD, black LAPD cop from the 30s at the time, and I have that cop's book. Anyway, all that to say is that I like to think that yes, that leaking into the Harry books and in some of my other books, I'm working on a heist novel now, and the character is very much inspired by. I've written this character before, but the character is very much inspired by Westlake's Parker novels, which don't have a lot of humor, but you can't, I just think because invariably, I mean, listen, under pressure, people act in very interesting ways, right? They crack up, or like, cops and EMTs who deal with horrific, bloody scenes. Maybe not daily, but certainly encounter that more often than the regular civilian. Also, then develop a kind of black humor, right? A kind of gallows humor to relieve some of that stress, because just psychologically, if you dwelled on it, you would lose your mind. So I think to that extent that even though Harry and Anita find themselves in quite the pickle in some of their outings, they do take a moment to kind of breathe and relax. Because and reflect, right?
that scene in the alley was hilarious. Okay, I can't go into the details because I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but you know, was not expecting that. Where
So all that to say is that yes, I mean I think, but you know how it is. It's in the act of writing, right? Because this isn't in the outline. My outlines are not. They used to be more extensive. They're not as extensive now. And then invariably, of course, you just come to the scene and you're inhabiting these characters. We're in their skin, and you think, oh, okay, what would happen now if I was Harry or if I was Anita? What would happen? How would I react to this? You know what I mean? So they take things serious, but they also understand that, listen, man, you gotta, sometimes you just gotta step back for a second and kind of look at this bigger picture and think, oh, this is some strange stuff we're involved in, and we have to step lightly. We have to be clear where we're going, but sometimes we have to, also take a moment and say, right,
the other thing that Gary does really well that is he writes great sex scenes.
Well, they're brief though, but they're brief, John. They used to go on forever when I was young. Now it's not so much. Thanks a lot, Pops. All right, thank you.
Lily, you want to get us out of this one too?
Well, I just hope it wasn't the result of actual research that led to this.
Yeah, John, is an old Richard Pryor joke, which I will not say because it would be terrible, and for all kinds of reasons. You can't say it now. Okay.
Oh man. That one got me, you guys. That was funny. Before we detoured a little bit, I was going to say, in a month or two ago at one of these events, somebody, I can't remember who it was talking to me about how they had a mentor say that they always had their writer friends take acting classes because it helped them like tap into this sort of creative decision making that you just outlined, Gary, about. You find yourself like in the scene. It wasn't necessarily in the outline, but it helps you sort of improv, for lack of a better word, or like come up with what would happen in that situation. And that's just so interesting to hear. As a person that does not write novels, I think that's very interesting.
Why don't you write novels, Lily?
You know what? Maybe I should.
Yeah.
Maybe you should.
Maybe you should. That's it.
No, I'll leave it to you guys. That's
there you go.
Probably the best for everybody. All right. We've talked about it just a tiny bit. Gary and John, you both have a very interesting parallel in that you've both worked in comics. And you have, varying backgrounds in comics and those sorts of things. So I just wanted to see how that has influenced your writing process, if at all, or if you find that they're very, very distinct.
John?
Well, so for me, and I have to, just in terms of the, Lily, really write a novel. I mean, I was working at the Walt Disney Company in 2020, and I got furloughed during the pandemic, and I didn't know what to do, and so I had this story running around in my head for about 12 years, and I just sat down and started working on the outline, and the outline that I produced is very similar to the outline that you would turn in for a 6 to 12 issue arc of a comic book story. And then when you look at when you look at the outline and compare that with the comic book, everyone knows the character Wolverine. Everyone is always like, Wolverine's the biggest character for comic book people in the Marvel Universe. And he started out in one little panel in Giant Size X-Men where it's this shot of Wolverine with his claws out, and it's like, I'm going to go train in the Danger Room. And it's like, you don't know what the Danger Room is. You don't know who Wolverine is. And then because comics are this sort of high velocity, high volume storytelling medium, you take these things and expand on them. So what SJ and I did is like there's enough material in the first book that can branch off into very deep lore, and so the comics are a lot like film, but with a lot of like more depth because of the volume of pages that you're producing. So we've produced a lot of lore, and then we really wanted this to be, I don't know if Gary, do you know Marv Wolfman?
Only slightly. We've been on a couple panels together.
Yeah, so Marv has and he was editor in chief of Marvel in the '70s, and he just calls it big dumb fun. And I don't want to say that our book is dumb, but we want to make big dumb fun that entertains people, so that they're going to come back, every year, or and read it. So
I would just add, Lily, that yeah, it's interesting when you write. I mean, for me, when I write a comics script, like right now, I'm working kind of noodling on an idea with this artist friend of mine, and I get really jazzed about that, right? Because it's so alluring to me that you can write these words, and this other storyteller who has the power of visuals can bring it it ain't really to life, but it's close enough for me. Realize it on the page, and you can just look at it, and it's just wonderful. It's just marvelous. And so yeah, I think, and then also now having written a few TV scripts, one of the big differences is, in a comic script, you do describe the visual, or at least you might give a reference for the artist, right? Like, this person looks like that, or it's a futuristic village, but it looks like this thing in Action Comics number 36, or whatever the heck it is, right? You might give them a link or some notion of what it is you're talking about. Generally speaking, in a TV script and a film script, you're fairly terse, right? Because it's the set designer's job to make the visuals. So your job is to say, unless there's a specific reason you're telling them something. It's a swank office, right? Okay, swank office or corner office, right? That's it. But unless you're telling them something specific, like there's a thermos on the end table because that thermos is going to play a role, or what's in the thermos is going to play a role, you generally are not breaking down what does this thing look like, or what is it in reference to. But having said that, all sort of circling back, all this stuff, then, no matter the medium you're writing in, and I think, but you have seen, I think, terseness is not quite the word, because there certainly are writers who write long and big. But I do think some of this stuff, just because now we've had, 100 years of filmography, and 100 years of people going to the movies, and maybe not quite 100 years, but some close to that, of people watching stuff on TV. There's a kind of shorthand we've all developed, I think, and that shorthand plays out in scripts, and I think now it plays out in books. Even though there are times, of course, you will just the nature of books, the pacing, you will slow it down, and you will take a moment to describe. I was describing the theme building at LAX because maybe people have seen it 1,000 times, but they're not quite sure. Well, what's the name of that thing? And it looks, this goofy thing looks like it's out of the Jetsons. So that's how you describe it. But so you do take a moment to, I think, in books, which is a wonderful thing in books, that you can have this real estate where you can take the way you've done a comic book script, the way you've done a TV script, and use some of that language, or use some of that sleight of hand to give a sense of the visual, to give a sense of where are we at this moment as Harry walks down the street, and what is Harry seeing, right? What is he visualizing? Where you would both describe that in a book, and you would also, if Harry was in a comic book, you would describe that for the artist.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I think this is a good moment to talk about the Kung Fu. we do need to discuss it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So we use swashbuckling as a word to talk about the murder of Mr. Ma because of the accuracy and the frequency with which there are these fight scenes that are just really come off the page. And that a reason for that perhaps is because you had a really wonderful consultant, John and SJ. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we did. When John sent me the outline, the first outline, there were places where there's a big fight, and it's kung fu, and this is not an art I know, and certainly not an art I can choreograph. But I had a friend who had studied kung fu with a guy named Paul Ko, who is at the Bo Law Kung Fu School, Kung Fu Studio in Chinatown. So we got in touch with him, and he was interested in the project. And we sent him. What I send him is the lead in and the lead out to each fight, and I tell him who's in the fight and how it needs to come out. This guy escapes, and this guy gets caught, and the good guys. This happens to the good guys. And what I expected when we first started working together was choreography. I expected this move, this move, this move, counter this move, this move, this move. What I get, as it turns out, is narrative, extensive, full of point of view, everybody's point of view, and in the present tense, and it goes on and on. I mean, the guy is hysterical, and this has to be made into the past tense point of view of our narrator, of either Lao She or uh, D, as Lao She has it narrated to him by D, and that so I take these things that I get from Sifu and make them into parts of our book, but they are. There's a part in the murder of Mr. Ma where someone has booby trapped a building, and I said to Sifu, "Go, whatever you feel will work." And his booby traps, I actually laughed out loud when I got the scene with the booby traps because some of them are so funny. So,
And he
go ahead.
he very naturally writes cinematically. It's interesting to observe because and this is just pure craft at this point. But there's prose which is it's in the past. There's comics which describe the thing that just happened, like that moment ago, and then cinema, which is this is what's happening right now. And so I'm pretty sure when we finally sell the movie rights, that we can just hand Sifu's original fight scenes and
Yeah, and in fact, the fight scenes are some of them, especially the one I'm working now to translate into the second book, are longer, and I have to cut some of the moves out because these things go on and on and on. And in this fight, we have basically four separate fights going on, and I'm already at 8 pages of fighting, um, and including the dog. Um, so he's really, we were so lucky to have found this consultant. He's got a great sense of humor, and he is naturally visual. I know how he does it on his students. He has his students and himself. um how about, we'll do this and then we'll counter with this, and then his assistant is like busy writing it down as it's going on, and sometimes he says to her, come on, let me see if this works, and then she can't write it down because she's in the scene. But it's so terrific to have him as part of this team. Paul Ko, Bo Law Kung Fu. If you're in New York and you want to study, that's the place to go.
so someone just asked if this makes you want to take kung fu, SJ.
If this makes me want to take Kung Fu, last time I went down there to talk to them, Sifu said, let's suit you up, and that would be fun. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It does make it tempting. It does, especially when you get to the weapons, but the weapons don't come until late in the game. So I don't know.
But there's this one scene in the second book that if you look at Sifu's Facebook page, it's astounding because he's doing this very specific form of fighting with everyday, because the other thing is they can turn any everyday object into a weapon with which they could kill you. Sifu
Yes,
could kill you. He could kill you with a Q-tip,
There you
yes,
go, baby.
yes, he could.
but he won't, which we're happy about.
Listen.
That's awesome. Such a unique story too. I remember when we all heard about it on staff. We're like, no way. That's so cool. That's awesome. All right, folks, if you've got any questions for Gary or John or SJ or all three of them, this is a great time to put it in the Q&A box. We'll get to the ones that we can. I do want to ask everybody kind of what's coming up next for them, but Gary, specifically, Ash Darkest Night is not your only book coming out this year. You have got 4 reissues of
All right.
your Ivan Monk series that are coming out that were originally published in the 90s.
Yes.
How does that feel to have
It
them
makes me feel
published
old.
in 2024?
Makes me feel, oh my God, how all that time go by? But yes, my original entree into the mystery world were these 4 novels featuring Private Eye Ivan Monk. The first novel, as you mentioned at the top, Lily, is set in the aftermath of the events of '92. The other big riot, or one of the other big riots here in Los Angeles, and a riot that in a lot of ways, of course, is much different than Watts, but also some similarities. And my character, Ivan Monk, is hired for, it's about a year and a half after the events of '92. He's at a groundbreaking ceremony. His ex-girlfriend, an old flame of his, is the city councilwoman for this particular area, which includes the Flashpoint, which was Normandy, and Florence and Normandy, in South Central as we called it then. I guess now we're supposed to call it South LA. And anyway, and the body is unearthed at this groundbreaking ceremony, which is this groundbreaking ceremony is symbolizing hope, and we're moving forward. And yet here's this body, and the body turns out to be of a missing Korean merchant who had gone missing a couple weeks before the events jump off, before the riot jumps off. And so then, for PR reasons, the Korean Grocers Association hires my character to find the murderer, to solve the murder, and that then gets us back. All these various layers are peeled back and gone into. And so then that book was then followed by 4 other novels. And there's been a series, and so I'm very pleased that Soho is bringing those 4 books back out. The first book has got a lovely it's a deluxe edition. It has a intro by Walter Mosley. We have a timeline we've worked out, or a timeline of the events of those 6 days of the riots. And there's a couple of other little extras. So I'm very happy with that. I think that drops in May, right? Lily drops in, yeah. And then the 3 other books come right behind it. And I'll just real quickly, I didn't stop writing Monk. Because there's several short stories with the character. So at some point I'm going to go back to him. But I realize now that I'm gonna set that book. That book will be the Monk, the last Monk novel, the 5th novel. But it'll be set in the '90s, because I need a couple. In particular, I need his older mentor character, who's a World War II vet, who's already an old man, in the '90s, and he might be around now, but he would be pretty, maybe slightly incoherent. And I need him kind of mobile and moving. So for a lot of different reasons, I'm going to set that book back in the '90s, and that'll be that.
Total non sequitur, but I've only met him the one time, but I had breakfast with Walter Mosley, and it's interesting. He does a lot of his writing on like this 25-year-old BlackBerry still.
Of course, yes.
It's just it looks like a Casio calculator. It's
Right?
crazy.
Yeah. Do you know? By the way, Walter worked in computers. There's a character in the Easy Rollins books. I think he killed them all, but I love the name of this character. His name was Mofas, Mofas. That was actually an acronym for some old, program
I
that
didn't
they
know
used.
that.
Yeah. But it was. I love that name, man. I just Mofas. I just thought, oh, that's perfect.
I love it. John and SJ, what's next for you guys?
Well, for me, the next Mr. Ma, which is now in edits from Soho, so we're working on that. Plus, I got to put in these last fight scenes, which are coming along, and then I also have in my other series, Bill Smith and Lydia Chin. There's a Lydia Chin book coming out sometime next year. So that's for me, John.
I have multiple day jobs, so I do a lot of things. I am a partner in the video game business, and we make digital collectible card games. I'm the CEO of a company called Cryptozoic Entertainment, and we make board games, trading cards, other stuff. And then we have a new publishing imprint that we started called Pan Universal Galactic Worldwide, which is it's a genre publisher for mainly nerd collectible stuff. And then I have this just ridiculous list of, boy, that would make a great story, And so I call SJ. This is like those moments where I'm like, hey, SJ, can I give you a call? And I have another series. It's almost all done. The outline's almost all finished with which SJ said if there were no more Mr. Moss, she would write. And I would love that because she's my partner.
Or if there got to be more hours in the day, or something happened. I mean, I'm not. I'm not. Mr. Ma could stay, and we just need a system. We need a. But
Raul, you can go to the Mysterious Bookshop and get copies signed by both of us. Yeah.
Oh, that was because there's a question. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I have a series that I'm so passionate about. It's a retelling of Thackeray's Vanity Fair, and it can only best be described and has been described as highly esoteric. So
That's awesome. All right, I think are coming to the end here. If you've got any last minute questions, feel free to drop them in the little Q&A box on the right side of the screen. But I'm going to announce our door prize winners. And also, if you are looking for signed copies, John and SJ and Gary have signed some book plates that will be available through Mystery to Me. And you can click this little green button down there. So our first prize, $25 gift card to Mystery to Me, is Janet Carter. Congratulations, Janet.
Very good, Janet.
I will be emailing everybody right after this so we can talk you through the logistics of redeeming your gift card. $50 gift card. The winner is Rachel Cantor, who happens to be another Soho Press author.
Oh, Rachel.
Released a book last year. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us today.
A great book, too.
A wonderful book, Half-Life of a Stolen Sister.
Yeah, really.
Also on sale now.
Yeah. John, it's a retelling of the Brontes. So,
Oh, I want to see. I want to read that.
There you go.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Very good.
And then we've got our grand prize winner, $75 gift card to Mystery to Me, is Raul Garza.
Raul. Go, Raul.
No.
So thank you all for joining. Gary, John, SJ, thank you so much for lending your expertise and your time for us. Making me laugh.
I know this won't matter to you guys from the East Coast and all that stuff, but I'm praying for the Lakers tonight. That's all I'm saying.
I'll be watching the game. I'll be watching the game for you, Gary. I will give them because I got nothing against them. And the Knicks don't play till tomorrow. So
there you go. All right.
Well, we'll let everybody go then. Get themselves ready.
Gotta get to the game, right?
Okay.
John, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Ungodly hour in Japan.
All right.
Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time.